I reported a $50,000 bank error, but the branch manager froze my account, accused me of lying, and accused me of theft. I noticed the deposit on a Tuesday morning. I was checking my balance before paying rent, and suddenly, there was $50,000 sitting in my checking account. I knew immediately it wasn't mine. I made $42,000 a year, and I had never seen that many zeros in my account in my entire life. I didn't touch it. I didn't transfer it. I didn't even think about keeping it. I drove straight to my bank branch on Hillcrest Avenue and walked up to the first available teller. I explained the situation calmly. I said there was a large deposit in my account that didn't belong to me, and I wanted to report it before it caused any problems. The teller looked at my account and told me to wait. She disappeared into a back office for about 10 minutes. When she came back, she was with the branch manager, a man named Donald who wore a too-tight vest and had a permanent frown. Donald asked me to step into his office. He closed the door behind us and sat down at his desk. He didn't offer me a seat, so I just stood there. He asked me why I was really there. I said I was there to report an error. He asked me if I had already spent any of the money. I said no. He asked if I had transferred any of the money. I said no. He asked if I had told anyone about the money. I said no. I came here first. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me like I was lying. He said people don't just walk into banks to return $50,000. He said in his 15 years of banking, he had never seen anyone do what I was claiming to do. He said I probably moved the money already and was here to create a paper trail. I told him I hadn't touched anything. I told him he could check the account activity right now. He said he didn't need me to tell him how to do his job. He said he was going to freeze my account pending an investigation. He said if I had done anything improper with those funds, I would be hearing from their legal department. I asked him to note that I came in voluntarily to report the error. He said he would note whatever he felt was appropriate. He printed out a form and told me to sign it. The form said I acknowledged that funds had been deposited in error and that I agreed to cooperate with the bank's investigation. I read it carefully and signed it. I asked for a copy. Donald said copies would be available after the investigation concluded. I asked for a reference number or confirmation of my visit. Donald said that wasn't how this worked. He said I should go home and wait to be contacted. I asked how long the investigation would take. He said as long as it needed to take. I left the branch feeling like a criminal even though I had done everything right. My account was frozen for 3 weeks. I couldn't pay my rent on time for the first time in 6 years. I had to borrow money from my sister to cover groceries. Every time I called the bank, I got transferred to voicemail. I left messages that nobody returned. On week 4, I got a letter in the mail. It was from the bank's corporate office. The letter said my account was being reviewed for suspicious activity and that I should not attempt to access any funds until further notice. It said failure to cooperate could result in account termination and possible legal action. I called the number on the letter and finally got a real person, a woman named Ruth in the corporate resolution department. I explained everything from the beginning: the deposit, my immediate report, Donald's accusations, the frozen account, the weeks of silence. Ruth put me on hold for almost 20 minutes. When she came back, her voice was different, softer. She said she had pulled the records from my branch visit. She said she had also pulled the recorded phone call from when I first noticed the error and called customer service before driving to the branch. I had forgotten about that call. I had called the 1-800 number while still sitting in my car in my driveway. I told them about the deposit, and they said I should visit my local branch. That call was logged and recorded on their end. Ruth said the timestamps showed I reported the error within 40 minutes of the deposit hitting my account. She said the branch visit was logged 90 minutes after that. She said their internal records showed I had not attempted any transfers, withdrawals, or purchases with the deposited funds. She said the $50,000 was supposed to go to a business account with a similar account number, and the error was entirely on their end. She asked me why Donald had frozen my account and noted me as a potential theft risk. I told her what Donald said to me in his office. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said she would be escalating this matter internally. She said my account would be unfrozen within 24 hours. She said the bank would be waiving any fees I had incurred during the freeze period. She asked if I had experienced any financial hardship due to the freeze. I told her about missing rent and borrowing money from my sister. She said she would note that as well. My account was unfrozen the next morning. 2 days later, I got a call from someone. The man on the phone introduced himself as Travis Tillman from the bank's regional compliance office. His voice was calm and professional, nothing like Donald's accusatory tone. He apologized for everything I had been through and asked if I was available to meet in person the next day to discuss the situation and what the bank could do to make things right. I agreed immediately. He suggested meeting at a coffee shop near my apartment instead of the branch, which I appreciated because I never wanted to set foot in that Hillcrest Avenue location again. The next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early. Travis was already there, sitting at a corner table with a woman I didn't recognize. He stood up when I approached and shook my hand firmly. He introduced the woman as Marguerite Bowers from the bank's internal affairs department. She had a leather folder in front of her and a serious expression. Travis thanked me for coming and said they had been reviewing Donald's history after Ruth flagged my case as serious misconduct. Marguerite opened her folder and pulled out several printed documents. She explained they had gone back through 2 years of Donald's interactions with customers and found a disturbing pattern. Travis leaned forward and said, Donald had a history of aggressive behavior toward customers, but most people just switched banks instead of filing formal complaints. My detailed timeline and Ruth's documentation gave them enough evidence to launch a proper investigation. I felt a mix of relief and anger hearing this. Relief that I wasn't crazy for thinking Donald's behavior was wrong, and anger that he had been treating other customers the same way for years. Marguerite asked me to walk through everything that happened in Donald's office from the beginning. I took a deep breath and started describing the entire interaction. I told them how he refused to give me a copy of the form I signed. I explained that he wouldn't provide a reference number or any confirmation of my visit. I described how he treated me like a criminal from the moment I walked into his office, even though I came there voluntarily to report an error. Marguerite took notes while I talked, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific details. Travis listened carefully, nodding at certain points. When I finished, Marguerite looked at Travis and said something quietly that I couldn't hear. Then Travis turned to me and explained that Donald violated multiple bank policies during our interaction. He said the proper documentation procedures required giving customers copies of any forms they signed. He said customer treatment standards prohibited the kind of accusatory language Donald used with me. He explained that while the account freeze itself was justified as a precaution during the investigation, the way Donald handled it was completely wrong. Marguerite added that Donald should have provided me with clear information about the investigation process, expected timelines, and contact information for follow-up. Instead, he left me in the dark for weeks. Travis said the bank wanted to compensate me for the financial hardship caused by the freeze. He asked about specific costs I had incurred during those 3 weeks. I told him about the late rent fee my landlord charged me. I mentioned the money I borrowed from my sister to cover groceries and gas. I explained the overdraft charges from automatic payments that bounced when my account was frozen. Travis wrote everything down on a notepad. He asked if I had receipts or documentation for any of these costs. I pulled out my phone and showed him the late fee notice from my landlord. I opened my Venmo app and showed him the transaction where my sister sent me $800. I had screenshots of the overdraft fees from the bank's own mobile app. Travis took photos of everything with his phone. Marguerite said the bank would reimburse all my documented costs. She added that they would also provide additional compensation for the stress I experienced and the damage to my credit from the late rent payment. She asked if I had checked my credit report recently. I hadn't thought to do that. She suggested I pull my report and let them know if the late payment showed up, because the bank would work with the credit bureaus to have it removed if necessary. The meeting lasted about 40 minutes. Before we left, Travis gave me his direct phone number and email address. He said I could contact him anytime if I had questions or concerns. Marguerite handed me a business card and said the same thing. They both thanked me again for my patience and for reporting the original error honestly. 2 days later, a FedEx envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside was a check for $3,500. The attached letter broke down the payment into my documented costs, plus $2,000 for general damages. There was also a formal apology letter on bank letterhead, signed by someone in the corporate office I had never heard of. The letter thanked me for my honesty in reporting the original error and apologized for Donald's conduct during the investigation. I deposited the check immediately using my phone. I called my sister that same afternoon and told her I was coming over to pay her back. She said I didn't need to rush, but I insisted. When I got to her apartment, I transferred the $800 back to her Venmo account while standing in her living room. Then I sat down and explained everything that had happened since the account freeze. She listened quietly until I finished. Then she said she was relieved everything worked out, but angry on my behalf that I had been put through all that stress just for doing the right thing. She said most people would have kept the $50,000, or at least waited to see if the bank noticed. She said I did the right thing and got punished for it, which wasn't fair. I agreed, but said at least the bank made it right eventually. 3 days after I received the check, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered and heard a man introduce himself as Kevin Dunn, Donald's district supervisor. He said he was calling to personally apologize for what happened and to inform me that Donald had been placed on administrative leave pending the conclusion of the internal investigation. He assured me I would never have to deal with Donald again. He said the bank was taking my case very seriously and using it to review their training procedures for branch managers. He thanked me for my cooperation with Travis and Marguerite. I thanked him for calling and asked what would happen to Donald. Kevin said he couldn't discuss specific personnel matters, but the investigation would determine appropriate consequences based on policy violations and customer complaints. I asked Kevin what happened to other customers who might not have kept the kind of records I did. He went quiet for a second before answering. He said they were going back through Donald's files from the past 2 years to see if there were other problems they needed to fix. He said most customers just switched banks when they had bad experiences, so they never knew about patterns until someone like me pushed back with documentation. He thanked me again for being so thorough with my timeline and receipts. He said it made their investigation much easier and helped them see the bigger picture. I hung up feeling relieved, but also angry that Donald had probably treated other people the same way without consequences. consequences. 3 weeks went by without any more calls from the bank. I was starting to think the investigation would just fade away quietly. Then a FedEx envelope showed up at my door. Inside was a single-page letter on official bank letterhead. The letter informed me that Donald had been terminated for multiple policy violations and customer mistreatment. It listed specific policies he broke during my case, including proper documentation procedures and customer treatment standards. There was a whole section at the bottom about my rights to file additional complaints with banking regulators if I wanted to pursue the matter further. The letter included contact information for 3 different agencies I could report to. I read it twice and then set it on my kitchen counter. I thought about calling those agencies and making official complaints. I thought about how satisfying it would be to make sure Donald never worked in banking again. But then I thought about what I actually wanted from this situation. My account was working. I had been paid back for all my costs, plus extra. Donald lost his job. My name was cleared. Making more complaints felt like it would just drag everything out longer. I decided to let it go. I put the letter in a folder with all my other bank documents and moved on with my life. 2 days later, my phone rang with my landlord's number. I answered, and he asked about the late rent from last month. He said he noticed I paid it 3 days late, and there was usually a $50 fee for that. I explained the entire bank situation while pulling up my saved documentation on my laptop. I told him about the deposit error, Donald freezing my account, the 3-week wait, and how the bank eventually made everything right. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said he appreciated me explaining, and that he would waive the late fee since my payment history was otherwise perfect for 6 years. He said he understood it wasn't my fault, and that banking errors happen. I thanked him, and felt another piece of stress lift off my shoulders. I sent him copies of the bank letters by email, so he had proof in case he needed it for his records. The next afternoon, Ruth called my cell phone. She asked if everything had been resolved to my satisfaction, and if I needed anything else from the bank. I told her everything was fine now, and thanked her for all her help. She said my case had become a training example in their corporate office. She said they were using it to teach employees about the importance of listening to customers and following proper procedures when people report errors. She said too many employees assumed the worst about customers instead of treating them as partners in catching mistakes. I asked her what ended up happening with the original $50,000 that started this whole mess. She laughed and said it was successfully moved to the correct business account within hours of my first phone call to customer service. She said that customer never even knew there was a problem because the bank fixed it so quickly on their end. The only reason my situation got complicated was because of how Donald handled it at the branch level. If he had just processed my report normally, none of the freezing or accusations would have happened. A week later, an email arrived in my inbox from the bank. It was a customer satisfaction survey about my recent experiences with their services. I clicked the link and spent 20 minutes filling it out. I gave Ruth and Travis perfect scores on every question. I wrote detailed comments praising how they helped me and fixed the situation. Then I got to the section about branch services. I gave Donald the lowest possible scores and wrote 3 paragraphs detailing exactly what went wrong in his office. I described how he refused to give me a copy of the form I signed. I explained how he wouldn't provide a reference number for my visit. I wrote about how he treated me like a criminal even though I came in voluntarily to report an error. I wanted to make sure my feedback was part of his permanent record even though he was already fired. I wanted the bank to have documentation of what he did wrong so they could avoid hiring people like him in the future. 2 months after the initial Tuesday morning when I first saw that deposit, my phone rang with another unfamiliar number. I answered and heard a woman introduce herself as Lois Randolph from the bank's HR department. She said she was calling to ask if I would be willing to participate in a customer service training video. She explained they wanted to use my case as a positive example of how customers should be treated when they report errors. She said they wanted to film me talking about my experience and what the bank did right and wrong. She said it would be used internally to train new employees and retrain existing ones. I asked how long it would take, and she said probably 2 hours including setup and multiple takes. She said they would pay me $500 for my time. I thought about it for a minute. I thought about how Donald treated me and how I never wanted another customer to go through that. I told her I would do it. The filming happened at the corporate office 3 weeks later. They set up lights and cameras in a conference room and had me sit in a chair facing the camera. A woman with a clipboard asked me questions and I answered them honestly. I talked about discovering the deposit and immediately knowing it wasn't mine. I described driving straight to the branch to report it. I explained how Donald made me feel like a criminal instead of someone trying to help. I talked about the 3-week freeze and how it affected my life. Then I talked about Ruth and Travis and how they fixed everything. I talked about the importance of documentation and keeping records of every interaction. The whole thing took about 90 minutes. They filmed some parts multiple times to get different angles. When we finished, the woman with the clipboard thanked me and said the video would be used starting next month. They processed my payment right there, and I left with a check for $500 in my wallet. A month after the training video, Travis called me one last time. He said he wanted to give me an update on something important. He said the bank had implemented new policies requiring managers to provide documentation and reference numbers for all account actions. He said every customer who reports an error or has an account frozen now gets a printed receipt with a case number and contact information. He said managers have to log every interaction in the system with timestamps and notes. He said they created these new policies directly because of my case and my detailed record keeping. He said my documentation helped them identify gaps in their procedures that had existed for years. He thanked me again for my patience and for helping them improve their systems. I thanked him for following up and for taking my case seriously. After we hung up, I sat on my couch and thought about how much had changed since that Tuesday morning. I thought about how doing the right thing had turned into weeks of stress and frustration, but I also thought about how the bank eventually made things right and used my experience to help other customers. I thought about Donald losing his job and new policies being created. I pulled up my banking app and checked my account balance. Everything looked normal. My direct deposit had gone through that morning like it always did. The account worked perfectly. No freezes, no problems, no missing money. 6 months passed and my life went back to normal. I checked my banking app every morning and everything worked the way it was supposed to. My direct deposits showed up on time. My automatic payments went through without any problems. The account balance stayed accurate, and I never saw any weird holds or freezes. I actually had more money saved than before because of the bank's compensation. The $3,500 they gave me covered everything I lost during the freeze, and then some. I paid back my sister right away and put the rest into savings. I opened a high-yield savings account at a different bank just to be safe, but I kept my main checking account where it was. I didn't want to go through the hassle of changing all my automatic payments and direct deposit information. Plus, the bank had fixed their problems, and I figured they wouldn't make the same mistakes again. I started using a different branch across town for anything I needed to do in person. The staff there didn't know anything about what happened with Donald, and they treated me like any other customer. I could walk in and make a deposit or ask a question without feeling like I was watched or judged. The branch manager at that location was friendly and professional. She helped me set up online bill pay one time and never once made me feel uncomfortable. It was nice to just be a regular person doing regular banking stuff. The whole experience taught me something important about doing the right thing. It's not always easy, and it doesn't always work out quickly. Sometimes you have to deal with people who don't believe you or systems that don't work the way they should. But if you keep good records and stay persistent and don't give up, things usually get sorted out eventually. I kept every email and every letter and every receipt from the whole situation. I still have them in a folder in my desk drawer just in case I ever need them again.